The cold, welcome-early sun was setting over the beautiful city skyline, casting long golden shadows on the pavement. She stood quietly by the revolving glass door of one of the most luxurious hotels in town. She wore a long beige coat, slightly wrinkled from travel. Her shoes were plain, her hands rough from work, and her hair was tied back in a simple bun. She looked like any other tourist, a little tired, a little lost, and very much ignored. Her name was Elise. She had a soft voice and gentle eyes, and she had come all the way from a small village in Eastern Europe. Everything in this city was new to her. The lights were too bright, the buildings too tall, and the people moved too fast. But she wasn't afraid. She was here with a purpose. She was going to surprise her husband. What no one at the hotel knew was that Elise was married to the man who owned it. She stepped inside, pulling her small suitcase behind her. The lobby was grand, with marble floors, golden chandeliers, and a polished reception desk that gleamed under the lights. She walked up slowly, a little unsure, and waited in line behind two well-dressed businessmen. When it was her turn, the receptionist barely looked up. Double quotes, "Can I help you?" The woman asked in a cold voice. Elise smiled politely. "Hello, I'd like to check in, please. My name is Elise. Last name?" The woman asked flatly. "Kovac," she said. The receptionist typed for a moment, then frowned. "I don't see a reservation under that name." "Oh, I didn't make one." "I thought I could book a room now if you have any available." The receptionist looked her up and down, her eyes narrowing. "We're fully booked," she said quickly. Elise looked around the empty lobby. "Are you sure? I can pay now." "Yes, I'm sure. No rooms." The woman turned to her screen, clearly done with the conversation. Elise hesitated. "I have come a long way. Is there anything, ma'am?" The receptionist said sharply. "We don't have anything available. Try another hotel." A man in a sharp black suit standing nearby glanced over. He was the assistant manager. He had been watching Elise since she walked in. Something about her simple look made him suspicious. She didn't fit in. Not here. He walked over. "Is there a problem?" "She wants a room." "She doesn't have a reservation," the receptionist said with a smirk. "We're full," the man said before Elise could speak. "Please leave." "But," Elise began. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to leave the property." She looked around. People were staring. Her cheeks burned. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't understand why they were treating her like this. She stepped back slowly. "I understand," she whispered, and then she turned and walked out into the cold night. What the hotel staff didn't know was that Elise wasn't just the wife of a billionaire. She was the heart of everything he had built. The man who owned this place, the man they all feared and admired, was the man who had once slept on a floor with her, had sold flowers in the rain beside her, and had promised her that no matter how rich he became, he would never forget where he came from. And tonight, he would be arriving soon. Elise didn't call him. She didn't want to ruin the surprise. Instead, she walked slowly down the street, looking for a cheap place to sit. Maybe get a coffee, maybe just wait until morning. She found a small park nearby and sat on a bench under a dim lamp. It was cold. She wrapped her coat tighter around her and stared at the traffic. She didn't cry. Not yet. An hour passed. Then two. Finally. She took out her phone and sent a short message. "I'm in town. Wanted to surprise you. Can we meet?" She didn't say where she was. He replied almost immediately. "Of course." "Where are you?" But just as she was about to reply, her phone died. She closed her eyes. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, a black car pulled up in front of the grand entrance. The doorman rushed to open the door. Out stepped a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit. His name was Alexander King. His eyes were sharp. His presence was commanding. Everyone recognized him. He was the owner. He didn't smile. He rarely did. But today he was excited. His wife was in town. He had just seen her message. He hadn't seen her in months. Not since he left for expansion deals abroad. He walked into the lobby, nodded at a few people, and went straight to the front desk. "Did a woman come here earlier today?" Eastern European accent. Small suitcase. Simple coat. The receptionist blinked. Maybe. The assistant manager stepped in. Sir, we had a woman like that. She didn't have a reservation. Alexander's expression changed instantly. Where is she? We told her to leave. She didn't belong here. The silence that followed was thick. Alexander stepped closer. Describe her, now, the man stammered. She said her name was Elise, I think. The temperature in the room dropped. Alexander's single quotes. Hands curled into fists. The staff around him froze. He turned slowly, his jaw tight. You threw my wife out of my hotel. The assistant manager went pale. I didn't know, sir. How dare you judge her by how she looks? Alexander said quietly, his voice shaking with anger. The entire lobby went silent. Find her, he ordered. Check every camera. Search every block. And if anything happens to her, you're done. And then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the hotel. Rage burning in his chest. On the street, Elise was still sitting on the cold bench. Her coat was not enough to keep her warm anymore. She was shivering slightly, and the night wind was sharp against her cheeks. Suddenly she heard footsteps. A soft voice spoke near her. Are you Elise? She looked up. A young bellboy from the hotel stood there out of breath. Your husband. He's looking for you. He sent me. Please come with me. But before she could rise, a black van pulled up on the curb across the street. The door slid. Open fast. A man inside shouted. Elise. The bellboy turned. Who's that? Elise stood up slowly, confused. Come with us, the man in the van said. Your husband sent us too. The bellboy frowned. No, he didn't. I just spoke. To him. Both men looked serious. The van door remained open. And in that moment, Elise had to choose. Who was telling the truth. Who was really sent by her husband? And what was going on behind the scenes? The wrong-turned streetlights flickered as cold wind swept through the city. Elise stood frozen between the two strangers, one on foot and one waiting inside the van. The young bellboy, his cheeks flushed from the cold and panic, kept glancing at the van nervously. The man inside the vehicle, wearing a dark coat and black gloves, leaned out slightly and gestured again. Elise, come. Alexander sent us. We're here to take you to him. Please, it's not safe out here. His voice was calm, polite even, but something about it felt too smooth, too rehearsed. Elise looked at the bellboy, whose name she didn't even know yet. He stepped in front of her slightly, protective in his posture, his breath visible in the night air. Ma'am, I swear to you I spoke to Alexander King myself. He told me to come find you. This van? I don't know who they are. The man in the van smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We're wasting time. She's freezing. Get in, Elise. She hesitated. Then a strange detail caught her eye. The van had no hotel branding, no license plate visible in the dim light. And the man inside hadn't called her Mrs. King, not Madam, not even Miss Kovac. Just Elise, casually. F-M-I-L-I-R-O-Y. Her heart started to race. Something wasn't right. She stepped back quickly, grabbing the bellboy's arm. I'll go with him, she said, her voice trembling but steady. The man in the van's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. He reached for something near his side, but before he could do anything, the bellboy pulled Elise into a nearby alley and shouted, Run. They dashed into the narrow passage between buildings, feet pounding against wet pavement. Elise's breath came in sharp bursts, the cold air slicing her lungs. Behind them the van screeched as it pulled away, headlights bouncing over the sidewalk, tires screeching as it turned to follow. The bellboy turned left, then right, navigating. The back alleys like someone who had lived in this city his whole life. Trash bins blurred past them. The smell of smoke and damp stone filled the air. Finally, they slipped into a quiet side street and ducked behind a closed cafe. Crouching low under an outdoor table, Elise clutched her chest, trying to calm her breath. Who is that? The bellboy shook his head, his voice low. I don't know. but they weren't from the hotel. Something's wrong. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. Battery's almost dead. But I texted your husband before we left. He's close. He's looking for you. Elise leaned back against the cold wall, her heart still racing. I didn't know it would be like this. I just wanted to surprise him. I thought it would be sweet. The bellboy looked at her kindly. Sometimes surprises come with danger. But you're safe now. We'll stay hidden until he gets here. Meanwhile, Alexander King was not a man used to feeling helpless. But as he stood in his hotel suite staring at the security footage frames showing Elise being turned away at the reception, then walking out alone, his chest tightened with a pressure he couldn't control. How had this happened? He had given strict orders years ago that every guest be treated with dignity. And more importantly, he had made it very clear to his executive team, Elise was never to be turned away. Never. He slammed his hand on the table. His assistant flinched nearby. Sir, the assistant said gently. Got a ping from a phone near Fifth and Ivy. Someone matching her description was spotted. Alexander didn't wait for more. He stormed out of the suite, his driver scrambling to catch up. Get the car, now. The streets blurred past as the sleek black vehicle cut through the city. Alexander's mind raced. He had spent 10 years building his empire hotels, resorts, real estate, global investments, but none of it meant anything without Elise. She had seen him at his lowest, stood beside him through every failure, and believed in him when no one else had. He could never forget the day they met. She had been working as a server in a small cafe in Prague. He had been broke, looking for a job, barely surviving off scraps. She had offered him a cup of tea, free of charge. With a smile that warmed his entire life, she was the only person who had seen him. Not for his ambition, not for his potential, but for his soul. And now, someone had made her feel small. Someone had pushed her out into the cold night, like she didn't belong. They would pay for that back at the cafe alley. Elise and the bellboy remained hidden in silence. She was starting to shiver again, her fingers numb. The wind cut through her coat like it was paper. What's your name? She finally asked. He blinked. Me. Oh, Josh. Thank you, Josh, she said softly. He nodded, clearly embarrassed. Just doing my job. But she looked at him with genuine gratitude. You did more than that. A car pulled up at the corner of the alley. Elise froze again. The headlights didn't move. Then the door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. He walked with purpose, his coat billowing behind him, and even in the dim light, she could see his face. It was Alexander. Elise. His voice cracked as he rushed forward. She stood slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. He didn't care about the dirt on her coat or the scratches on her hands. He ran to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it seemed he was afraid to ever let go again. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry this happened. She buried her face in his chest. I didn't want to ruin your surprise. I thought they would be kind. He pulled back gently and looked her in the eyes. They should have been. They will regret what they did. He turned to Josh. Thank you. Truly. You have no idea what you've done. Josh nodded, still wide-eyed, still processing the weight of the moment. Alexander took off his coat and wrapped it around Elise. Come, let's get you warm. They climbed into the car. The door shut. Warmth filled the space. But just as the vehicle started moving, Alexander's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. An anonymous message appeared. She was supposed to be alone. This isn't over. His jaw tightened. He looked out the window into the shadows of the night, and he realized this wasn't just about hotel staff being rude. Someone had planned this. Someone wanted to get to Elise, and they weren't done yet. Whispers in the dark. Silence inside the car felt heavier than the cold outside. Elise leaned against Alexander's shoulder as the vehicle moved quietly through the city. His arm stayed wrapped around her, firm and unyielding, like a wall, shielding her from everything that had happened. But even with her eyes closed, she could feel the tension in his body. He was holding her, but his mind was somewhere else racing through questions, suspects, and memories that were now flooded with new fear. The message had changed everything. She was supposed to be alone. This isn't over. It played in his mind like a broken tape over and over again. The wording wasn't random. Whoever had written that message knew where she had been, knew the timing, and most terrifying of all, they had intended for something to happen to her. At least didn't know about the message yet. She only knew that something strange had happened, that she'd been chased, that someone had pretended to know her husband. But her heart was still too shaken to connect the pieces. The warmth of the car and Alexander's presence were the only things grounding her in that moment. "You're quiet," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the engine. Alexander looked down at her, forcing a small smile, just thinking. She lifted her head slightly, looking into his eyes. "You're angry." He nodded slowly. "I'm furious." He wanted to tell her everything, the message, the van, the surveillance footage they were now reviewing, the private investigators he had already called. But he didn't want to make her feel afraid again. "Not yet. Let's just get home." He said softly, "We'll talk once you're safe." "You mean the penthouse?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Not the hotel. Someone there might be involved. Or going to the estate." Elise knew what that meant. The estate was their true home outside the city, surrounded by gates and forest. A place no one could reach without permission. She hadn't been there in almost a year. As the car left the city behind and entered the winding hills, Elise began to feel the weight of exhaustion pulling at her. But she couldn't sleep. Not yet. Her mind was still filled with questions. Why? Would someone do this? She finally asked, her voice quiet. Alexander didn't answer at first. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Because not everyone is happy to see us together. But I never hurt anyone." "You didn't have to." He stared out the window as the trees blurred past. "When a man like me marries a woman like you, someone genuine, humble, pure, it reminds people of what they've lost. Or what they can never have. Jealousy turns to bitterness. Bitterness turns to hate." Elise was silent. Then she said, "I don't care what they think. I just want to be with you." He looked at her, and his voice softened. "And that's why they'll never win." They reached the estate just past midnight. It stood like a fortress in the hills, an old mansion rebuilt with modern security. Iron gates opened automatically, and guards stood on alert with flashlights and radios. Dogs barked in the distance, but stopped as soon as they recognized the vehicle. Inside, the lights were already on. Staff had been called in early. Warm fires crackled in the fireplaces. Tea had been prepared in the drawing room. Elise was led upstairs gently by a maid who remembered her from before. Alexander stayed behind, speaking in low voices with his security chief. "She was followed," he said, firmly. "I want full footage from every city camera within a 10-block radius of the hotel." "We're already pulling it, sir," the man said. "But there's something else." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "One of our internal staff leaked her arrival to someone outside. It was a short message, encrypted, but our firewall caught it just before it left the system." Alexander's voice turned cold. "Find out who it was, now." Upstairs, Elise sat in front of the mirror in the guest room. Her hair was loose now, falling softly over her shoulders. She stared at her own reflection and barely recognized herself. She wasn't just tired. She was changed. In that one night, she had been treated like she was nothing, judged by her coat, her voice, her silence, and then nearly tricked by a stranger pretending to help her. It made her feel small, like she had no identity, unless someone important stood next to her. She touched her cheek lightly. It was pale and cold. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Alexander entered, his steps quiet, his face unreadable. "You're okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I've posted guards at every door, and I'll sleep outside this room if I have to." "You don't have to do that," she said gently. "I do," he replied, sitting beside her. "Until I know you're safe again." She looked at him, searching for something behind his calm. "Do you think someone wants to hurt me because of you?" He nodded slowly. "But why?" Alexander exhaled deeply. "When you're in my world, Enemies don't always aim at you. They aim at what you love. Elise closed her eyes. I don't want to be a target, she said. You're not, he said quickly. You're the reason I keep fighting? But I promise you, I'll find out who's behind this. And then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. Slowly, gently, like she was the most fragile and valuable thing in the world. But while Elise slept that night, curled under thick blankets in the mansion that felt more like a castle, something stirred in the shadows. In a quiet office back in the city. A man in a dark suit sat watching camera footage on repeat. He zoomed in on her face, paused the screen, zoomed again. So this is the wife, he said to himself. A second man stepped forward. We failed to pick her up. Yes, the first man said calmly. But now we know more. Next time, we don't give her a chance to choose. He clicked the mouse again. A file opened. It showed Alexander King's holdings. Properties, schedules. And then a new image loaded, an aerial view of the estate, circled in red. The man said back at the estate. A soft alarm buzzed in the control room. One of the outer motion sensors had picked up movement. A single figure. Then it disappeared. The guard radioed it in. Probably an animal. But on the screen, a shape moved again just for a second, just enough for the camera to glitch. And no one noticed that inside the back garden, hidden behind a hedge, a small black device had been placed in the soil. Blinking silently, tracking everything. A shadow in the garden. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills, spilling golden light across the estate's grand windows and polished floors. Birds sang softly outside. Everything looked peaceful. Perfect even. But peace, Elise had learned, could be deceiving. She stood by the tall glass window in her room, a warm cup of tea between her hands. The view stretched far gardens, fountains, walking paths, and forest beyond. It was beautiful, untouched by the world's cruelty. But beneath it all, she sensed something strange, a quiet tension, a storm that hadn't yet broken, but had already formed in the distance. She took a sip and stared into the trees. It felt like someone was watching. Behind her, the bedroom door creaked open. It was Alexander. Did you sleep? He asked gently. A little, she replied. I had dreams. Good or bad? Both. He crossed the room and stood beside her, looking out the same window. You were always right about silence, she said. It says more than people think. Alexander didn't respond. He was deep in thought. He had barely slept either. His team had worked through the night, digging through the security breach at the hotel. A name had surfaced, an employee recently hired by an outside consultant. Someone with no known past, no digital trace, no references. That alone was suspicious. But even more concerning was the footage. Dozens of frames had been tampered with, especially the one showing Elise at the lobby. Someone didn't just want her turned away. Someone wanted to erase any sign that she had ever been there. We're increasing security, he finally said. Around the estate, too. Do you think they'll come here? She asked. He looked at her. I think they already have. She turned sharply. Last night, one of the garden sensors was triggered, he said. Nothing on camera, but the signal was real. And now we found something. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small black device. Barely bigger than a coin. A tracker, he explained. Buried in the garden. Not just listening. Recording. Elise stared at it, her heart sinking. How did it get there? Whoever planted it is trained? They knew where the cameras were. They moved fast. Then they saw me, she whispered. They heard me, Alexander nodded grimly. Yes, and they know you're here. She put the cup down, her hands now trembling. What do they want from me? She asked. He stepped closer and took her hands gently. You, Elise. Not because of who you are, but because of who you are to me. I'm not a weapon. To them, you are. Downstairs, the estate's control room buzzed with quiet urgency. Security officers watched monitors, scanning for the smallest signs of movement. Alexander's chief of security, a grizzled man named Connor, barked orders into radios. Double the perimeter sweep, no blind spots. Eyes on every door, every roof, every vent. On one monitor, a small drone hovered just outside the back gate. It wasn't theirs. Unknown drone spotted. Track and disable, Connor said immediately. A loud zap echoed from the outside. Then the screen went black. They had just confirmed it. Someone was probing the estate. But why? In the city, in a hidden room beneath a corporate building, a man known as Silas leaned over a table. Blueprints were spread before him. Digital schematics of the estate glowed on a tablet nearby. He wore black gloves, and a scar ran from his jaw to his neck like a thin red wire. A younger man stood beside him nervously. "We failed once," the younger man said. "They'll be more careful now." "We don't need to be careful," Silas replied. "We need to be fast." He tapped the blueprint. "She's the only weak point in his empire. She's the door. We get her and everything else crumbles. But the estate is a cage. Even gold cages have exits." He picked up a small device from the table. It looked like a pen, but when twisted, a needle emerged from its tip. "We move at nightfall. Prepare the team." Back at the estate, Elise sat with Josh, the young bellboy who had saved her life. Alexander had insisted he stay as a guest, even offering him a permanent job in private security. But Josh still felt like a guest in someone else's world. "You okay?" he asked her quietly. She smiled weakly. "I think so. You're brave." "Most people would have broken by now. I've been broken before," she said. "I just learned how to keep walking." He nodded slowly. They were sitting by the indoor pool, which shimmered under soft lights. The silence between them was calm, almost healing. Then Elise asked, "Why did you help me that night? You didn't even know me." Josh looked surprised. Then he shrugged. "You looked like my mother. If she passed? Years ago." Elise touched his hand gently. "She raised a good son." And just as those words hung in the air, the lights flickered once, twice, then returned to normal. Josh tensed. "That's not supposed to happen." He stood and walked toward the hallway. "I'll check the fuse." But Elise stayed frozen, because in that moment, through the large window by the pool, she saw something. A reflection. Not hers, not Josh's, someone else. A dark figure moving across the garden. Low and fast. Her breath caught in her throat. "Josh." She whispered, louder now. "Someone's outside." He rushed back, looked through the window, but the figure was gone. He reached for his radio. "Control, this is Josh. Possible intruder in the West Garden." "Copy that," came Connor's voice. "Hold position. Teams are on the way." Elise and Josh backed away slowly, their eyes never leaving the glass. And then a loud pop. Lights went out completely. The estate plunged into darkness. Alarm systems triggered. Red lights blinked from hallway corners. Emergency shutters began to close. "This is not a drill," Connor shouted into the radios. "All teams locked down Zone 2 and 3. Mr. King, secure your wife." Alexander was already moving through the halls, his gun drawn. He knew every inch of the estate, every hidden exit, every panic room. But right now, only one thought mattered. Elise. Where was she? In the darkness, Elise and Josh crouched near the pool, heartbeats loud in their ears. Flashlights swept across the gardens as security teams scrambled into position. Then a loud bang upstairs. And another. The front gate alarm screamed. They were under attack. "Come on," Josh said. "We need to move." They darted down a side corridor, away from the pool, toward a stairwell leading to the private quarters. Josh held a flashlight in one hand, his other hand gripping Elise's wrist to guide her. But just before they reached the next door, silhouette appeared in the hall. A head. Tall. Masked. Armed. "Run," Josh shouted. They turned to flee, but another figure blocked the way behind them. Too. "Intruders." Cornered. Elise. Single quotes. S breath. The one in front raised a small device. It clicked. And released a short, sharp burst of gas. Everything spun. Elise tried to scream, but the world went black before the sound left her mouth. Minutes later, Alexander found Josh lying unconscious by the wall, a bruise forming at the back of his head. But Elise was gone. Only a single item had been left behind. Her scarf. Soaked in a chemical that smelled faintly like flowers and iron. Alexander fell to his knees, staring at the empty hallway. And then he whispered, almost like a promise to the darkness, I will burn the world to find you. When fire meets steel, time slowed in the hallway where Elise had vanished. The air was thick with smoke and silence, the kind that comes only after a storm has passed and left something broken behind. Alexander remained on his knees for a long time, one hand clutching her scarf like it was a lifeline, the other trembling against the cold marble floor. His security team hovered near him, waiting for orders, waiting for fury, but for the first time in years, Alexander didn't speak. His silence scared them more than shouting ever could. Trace everything, he finally said, his voice hollow, but sharp like broken glass. Toll satellite feeds, traffic logs, air surveillance, thermal mapping. I want eyes on every corner of this city. Yes, sir, Connor responded immediately, already barking instructions into his radio. Alexander stood slowly, his eyes locked on the place where she had disappeared. Check every mile of forest, every vehicle that left in the last 10 minutes. Block the roads, shut down the airspace. If someone's flying her out, bring them down. His men moved fast, but no one moved faster than him. In 20 minutes. He was in the operations room, watching a digital map of the estate's perimeter light up with red and yellow beacons tracking sensors, motion detectors, drone feeds. Nothing but trees, wind, and echoes. She was gone. Completely off grid, Alexander's mind burned, not just with fear, but with memory. His hand rested on the console as his thoughts spiraled back to the moment she first told him she loved him. It wasn't during a candlelit dinner or under a night sky. It was in a cramped apartment, during winter, when they had barely enough food and a single blanket to share, even if you lose everything. She'd whispered back then, I'll still be here. And now she was the one lost, but he would find her. No matter what it took. No matter what he had to destroy along the way. In a cold, windowless room far from the estate, Elise woke slowly. Her head throbbed. Her mouth was dry. Her arms were restrained softly, but firmly with leather straps. The air was stale and humming with low, mechanical sounds. She blinked at the ceiling, then at the dim lights above. A shadow moved, then a voice. She turned her head, wincing. A man stepped into view. He was tall with silver in his hair, dressed in black. His face was calm, his posture casual, but there was something off in his eyes. A kind of stillness that only came from someone who had lost all sense of empathy. Who are you? Elise asked, her throat raspy. Someone your husband ruined, the man replied. Then why are you hurting me? He smiled. Because hurting you hurts him. Elise stared at him, unflinching. He won't stop until he finds me. I know, the man said. That's the point. He leaned closer. You're the fire inside him, and we need him to burn. Elise closed her eyes for a moment. Not in fear, but in focus. Her thoughts sharpened. Her fear turned into something else. Not anger. Not hate. Resolve. You think I'm his weakness, she whispered. But you're wrong. The man tilted his head. Am I? I am his strength, he laughed quietly. We'll see. He turned and left the room, locking the heavy door behind him. The sound echoed through the walls like a final warning. Alexander's private jet lifted into the sky before dawn, heading for one of his remote properties, an island compound known only to a handful of people. His sources had triangulated a possible route based on an unmarked van that had left the estate's vicinity minutes after the power outage. On board, he sat with a team of specialists, former intelligence agents, cybersecurity experts, and a quiet woman named Anya, who had once worked as an underground tracker in Eastern Europe. She was sharp, precise, and entirely without emotion when she spoke. Based on speed and terrain, she said, pointing to the map, they had to switch vehicles within 10 kilometers. We found tire tracks near an old rail access. Likely. They transferred to a cargo train heading northeast. Where does it lead? Alexander asked. Through mountains, tunnels, areas where satellite coverage is poor. He nodded. What's waiting at the end? We don't know yet, but we'll find out before they do. His hands gripped the edge of the table. They made one mistake. He said, "What's that?" Anya asked. "They didn't kill me first." Hours later, in the underground facility where Elise was held, the power flickered. The man who had spoken to her, his name was Silas, walked calmly through the main corridor, speaking into a phone. "Yes, she's here. Alive. No damage. She'll be useful." He paused. "Yes, I understand. We'll keep her isolated. Monitored." But he didn't realize what was already happening in the room where she sat. Elise had always been underestimated. She wasn't loud. She wasn't physically strong. But her strength came from somewhere deeper, years of surviving. Years of being overlooked and enduring anyway. As she sat on the cold chair, she twisted her wrists slowly, again and again. The leather strap was tight, but the buckle had a tiny flaw-loose stitching on the edge. Each small movement weakened the thread. After 20 minutes, she slipped one hand free. Then the other, and she waited because she knew he would come back. And this time, she'd be ready. Alexander's team reached a small village near the mountains by nightfall. The cargo train stopped hours earlier. Witnesses reported seeing 2 black vans drive away from the depot, escorted by motorcycles, but one of the motorcycles had been found wrecked. The rider, missing blood on the seat. They were moving fast and getting sloppy. Anya pointed at a narrow mountain road. "If they're hiding her, it'll be somewhere high, remote, stable, and off the grid." Alexander stared into the distance, his jaw clenched. "Then let's go find the highest place." In the facility, Silas returned to Elise's room. He opened the door slowly, expecting fear, but Elise was calm, sitting in the chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Ready for another chat?" he asked. She looked up, her voice cool. "Always." He stepped inside. Closed the door. And in that moment, Elise moved, not with speed, but with precision. She grabbed the heavy metal tray left on the floor and swung it upward, hitting his knee. Cried out. Stumbled. She lunged for the door, but he caught her ankle. She kicked hard. Broke free and ran into the hall, barefoot, her breath ragged, her eyes wild with adrenaline. Alarms triggered again. Guards shouted, but somewhere in the distance, closer than they realized, a drone buzzed quietly through the air, scanning the walls for thermal signatures. Inside the van nearby, Alexander saw her. A faint red outline on the 3rd floor. His voice cut through the coms. "We have her. Prepare for breach." Elise ran through the corridor, heart pounding, legs aching. Behind her, footsteps thundered. Ahead, a door. She threw herself through it and found a stairwell. Up or down? She chose down. Not because she knew where she was going, but because she knew Alexander was coming, and she would meet him halfway. The woman they underestimated ran blindly down the stairwell, the cold metal railing scraping against her palm as she descended, step after step, heart thudding like a war drum inside her chest. Alarms blared behind her, sharp, angry tones that echoed through the concrete hallways. The facility was waking up, and she could hear the panic in the footsteps of the men chasing her. They hadn't expected her to escape. They hadn't expected resistance. After all, to them, she was just a woman in a coat. A woman who didn't belong. But now they knew, and she wasn't going to let them forget it. She stumbled into a hallway lined with thick gray doors. No windows, no signs. She didn't know where she was or which way led out, but she moved forward anyway, trusting only the burning instinct in her chest. The scent of metal, oil, and damp concrete filled her lungs. Every breath felt like fire. Behind her, the footsteps grew louder. Closer. But then a blast. Loud. Deep, followed by shouts. The walls trembled. Another explosion rocked the building, shaking dust from the ceiling. And then gunfire, short bursts. Not the wildfire of panic, but the controlled rhythm of trained professionals. Her breath caught. He was here. Alexander. 2 floors above. Alexander led the breach with precision. He wore a black tactical vest, his eyes sharp, his movements deliberate. Anya was at his side, issuing silent hand signals to the other operatives who fanned out into the corridor. The floor was chaos, guards shouting, doors swinging open, smoke curling through broken vents. She's on the lower level, Anya said, glancing at her handheld scanner. Stairwell west side. Alexander didn't wait. He moved like a force of nature, silent, swift, relentless. This wasn't a business. Negotiation. This was war. And the woman they had taken was not just anyone. She was his world. His soul, his reason. Cover me, he said. He pushed through a locked security door and descended the stairwell, his boots echoing like thunder. The building groaned under the weight of damage. Pieces of ceiling hung like jagged teeth. A flickering light above him pulsed like a heartbeat. And still, he moved forward, never slowing, never hesitating. Elise turned a corner just as a guard emerged from a side door. He saw her and raised his weapon. Her hands flew up, instinctively. But before he could fire, a shot rang out from behind. Man dropped instantly. Elise spun around. Alexander stood there, breathless, his weapon still raised. Eyes locked on her, like he'd just found something he'd been missing his entire life. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she ran to him. He caught her. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing, trembling, her entire body collapsing into him. He wrapped his arms around her tightly, shielding her from the smoke, the alarms, the burning world around them. I'm here, he whispered. I have got you. You're safe now. I knew you'd come, she said through tears. He kissed the top of her head. Nothing could have stopped me. They moved quickly through the crumbling corridors. Anya and the team cleared the path, neutralizing any remaining resistance. The entire facility shook as another blast went off in the eastern wing, an explosive charge set to destroy their communication systems. The enemy couldn't be allowed to vanish underground again. When they reached the extraction point, a helicopter was already waiting, its blades spinning, stirring dust into a violent storm. Alexander helped Elise up, holding her hand like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. They took off seconds later, the facility shrinking beneath them. Below, smoke and debris clouded the ground like a warning to anyone who might dare touch her again. Elise leaned into Alexander, her head against his shoulder. Eyes fluttering closed for the first time in what felt like days. It's over, she whispered. Not yet, he said softly. But soon. 3 days later, back at the estate, sunlight streamed through the windows like a blessing. Elise sat on the balcony wrapped in a soft shawl, sipping tea, a blanket over her knees. The bruises on her wrists were fading. The scratches on her face had softened, but the strength in her eyes, it was brighter than ever. Alexander stepped outside, sitting beside her, silent for a while. Then he said, They found Silas. She didn't flinch. He was hiding in the woods, tried to escape, but he didn't get far. And now? She asked. He's in custody, and his network is gone. She nodded. Good. He looked at her gently. You saved yourself, Elise. I just got to you before they could hurt you worse. No, she said quietly, looking out over the garden. You didn't just get to me, you came for me. And that means more than you know. He reached out and took her hand. From now on, no surprises. We do everything together. Always. Even the boring things? She smiled. Especially the boring things. She leaned her head on his shoulder, letting herself relax in a way she hadn't in weeks. You know, she said softly, they thought I was weak. They were fools. They thought because I don't shout, I can't fight. You fought harder than anyone. They thought denying me a room made me invisible, she whispered. Alexander nodded. And now the whole world knows your name. They sat in silence after that, letting the wind carry their thoughts. And in that stillness, Elise finally understood something. Strength didn't always roar. Sometimes. Strength was quiet. Soft. Spoken. Simple. And unstoppable. A week later. A press release shocked the business world. Alexander King had removed his entire top management team at the hotel where Elise had first been humiliated. The receptionist and assistant manager were publicly fired. New leadership was installed, trained personally by Elise to ensure dignity and respect for all guests, no matter how they looked or where they came from. And then, in a stunning twist, Alexander renamed the hotel. It was now called Elise. Not for branding. Not for business. But for love. Months later, in a quiet village overseas. A young girl asked her mother, "Why is this hotel named after a woman?" And her mother smiled, because she changed everything.